So here's my top trick for junior developers and entry-level developers who want to become better at building software applications. I saw a question quote that said, what's your number one trick or tip for becoming a better software engineer? And assuming that this was someone who's entry level, still at the university, at their first job or something, and they want to become a better software engineer, which is something admirable, something that I'm really striving to help people with. So when trying to answer this question, I was trying to counter question myself with the following. Now, what's the difference between a junior developer and the senior developer and an experienced software engineer out there, right? So when thinking about this question, the few answers that came top of mind are experience, the ability to solve complex problems, the ability to predict different types of problems that would come up, experience, context, and the ability to see the bigger picture. So if I try to kind of take apart some of those, to break them apart into modular pieces, and I have to synthesize that and build them into something more comprehensive and more sane, more or less. Now, I would say my number one tip would be building, or rather reverse engineering the final platform you're about to offer. Now, most people try to do, most junior developers that I've worked with, they're pretty hesitant. They're fairly chaotic in building software applications, right? Because they lack the experience, they don't know how to start, they don't know what are the best practices, they don't know, they simply lack the experience to build a software application, right? So they need to take the more structured route in order to stay sane in the profession, because otherwise they would be fairly clueless, really unaware of what's the best way to do whatever they're supposed to do at work, right? So in order to do that, again, they need an level of organization. They need the ability to create some form of a framework which they should follow onwards, right? So that's kind of one of the best tips that juniors should follow. And an example, or rather the best way to do that, is through reverse engineering approach, which helps people kind of figure out the final solution and then reverse engineer it to the components and kind of elements and modules and everything else they need to build. And that's essentially how project management works too, and especially the waterfall model, right? With waterfall, you have a client, they come with a list of requirements, they need a budget and an estimate and time frame. So what managers usually do is they try to ask all the right questions, gather all the required context, and then speak with the dev team in order to get the complete feature set in order to build a project, right? So of course it only makes sense, and that's a standard scenario, and the developer should follow a similar approach. And now it's also important to make an analogy, to make kind of a parallel between junior and senior level engineers and project managers. And why do I say that? Because with the very same scenario, with a project that needs to be estimated, a junior project manager won't be able to ask all the right questions, and that's completely okay. So there would be some mistakes here and there. You'd fail once, twice, 3 times, but every single time you're going to get better. You're going to learn to understand the context. You're going to learn to build a scenario, to build the best list, the list of all use cases that you need to consider, and ask your client in order to assess what they actually need. So what's the most optimal way to build that so that they have all the features, but at the same time, you don't budget them with something completely insane, given the fact that they won't use 90% of the features that you've planned to build, right? So again, that's the same parallel between juniors and seniors, both in the software engineering field and the project management field too. But bottom line, the shortcut that I'm suggesting is just thinking about reverse engineering an application. So I've been preaching that for a while, and I have some people who do one of the two things and still fail, right? Number one is trying to imagine the complete scenario, the complete list of features, but jumping the gun too soon and trying to solve those problems without really any sort of sequence, any type of a project plan. What am I saying? Someone says, I want to clone Facebook, and I say, oh, okay, Facebook has posts and groups and users, so let's just build some users and try to interact with them, and let's build some simple dumb posts and then try to work some groups and take it from there, right? So this is lack of organization. Like we said a bit earlier, the lack of structure, the lack of organization isn't really helping beginner developers to take their life into their own hands and build something meaningful and reasonable without having to rebuild that. So that's kind of problem number one. And problem number two is taking a separate approach, like trying to think way too much of what a product needs from the start to the end and not the other way around. Because if someone wants me to build Facebook, but they say, well, I need to be able to do posts, and also I need users, and also I need groups, and also I need video messages and feeds and this and that and this and that, it gets pretty messed up. You can't understand all the use cases as to how does everything relate to one another, so it gets a lot more confusing and there are way too many different outcomes. While if you have a single outcome at the end, it's easier to reverse engineer it and just try to extract every single module and then plan it as a separate kind of library, as a separate sub-project, a framework, or whatever it is. So again, if there's a single just one trick I can give software engineers, especially beginner ones, it's try to understand the context and the bigger picture and reverse engineer it in your own kind of sub-project management system or given your own time frames and so on. So again, if someone comes and says, well, I want Instagram or a clone of Instagram, I'm only using familiar applications for a reason. So if you do that, you need to have an action plan on how to build an Instagram over time. So with that in mind, you need to take Instagram as a final platform, and then you need to break it apart into the different pieces that Instagram has, like just the ability to upload a photo, filters, the feed, users, connections, everything else from that specific list. So you need to categorize it, classify it, see how are modules connected with one another, which is exactly the context, and what's the best way to make it work. And then when you ask the follow-up questions before proceeding further, it's very likely that some of those questions would be based on your initial due diligence for what does Instagram represent and what does it look like and how does it work behind the surface. So with that in mind, you probably need to assess the need for some constraints, and by constraints I mean if you're building that software, what's the content base that you need to support? Like how many posts should your initial build support? Like should these be 500 or 5,000, 50,000, half a million, 5 million, 50 million, and so on, right? Because this will determine also the software architecture, server level, hyper availability and different high availability and different types of architectures for building the right toolset, right? So this again will also come into play once you have the bigger picture. So yeah, the very same thing goes regardless of the solution. Just get the solution, try to reverse engineer it, try to break it down into different phases, try to build kind of an action plan as to how would you approach that, and once you have that, just move forward and start building your minimum viable product. Most of the time that works really well because you understand the end goal, you understand the bigger picture. It's easier to assess where are you now and what does the end goal look like. It's also easier to build upon a solid foundation without having to always keep refactoring and cleaning technical debt. And it's less demotivating if you're just building stuff for the sake of building without actually having different milestones to hit. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Try to understand context, understand business problems in hand, because it's really important. It helps you make the right decisions. Understand the bigger picture, reverse engineer it, build it into kind of different milestones and take it from there. And this has helped millions of young software engineers. Give it a shot. This may or may not work for you, but it's definitely worth trying.